so I'll start the recording.
Yeah.
Good evening and welcome everybody to our lecture. So we are looking back at basically the origins of our life with horses, where it all started. So we had a lecture with Dr. William Taylor last time, and we are continuing on this topic, looking at the origins of horse and human interaction. And our lecturer today is Dr. Igor Chechushkov, who is working in the fields of archaeology and experimental archaeology. And he's going to tell about his research. We can keep, as usual, questions and suggestions for discussion to then, but you are welcome also to um, put them in the chat, and you can keep your videos on if you want to, but I will ask to keep the microphones off until the discussion, okay? So the word is to Igor.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank Anastasia for inviting me to give this talk. And um, thank you, everyone, for coming and to listen to me tonight. I should say that, unfortunately, I missed Will Taylor's talk the last week because I was in the middle of transition from the United States back to the old world. So I don't know what Will covered in his talk, and I should apologize in advance if there is any repetitions. But I don't think there will be many repetitions because I'm going to speak about some quite deep specifics on one hand, and on the other hand, I will provide you with some absolutely new data, which is not even published yet, and that probably will be some new pieces of information for you here. And another thing to mention about this comparison with what we'll probably cover and what I'm going to cover here is that I'm going to speak about quite a short period of time in the Bronze Age, around 2000 BC and 1600s BC, and maybe a bit later, that in a specific area of the Old World in the Western Eurasian steppes. So it's both narrowed down from the question of domestication to the shorter period of time and to like smaller area and specific core area where we have the first evidence of horse use. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm gonna talk about the materials which came from the parts of the Eurasian steppes which are located on the western side of this region, and of course it's not the whole Eurasia; it's only the steppe belt. So it's everything north from the Caspian Sea and east from the Balkans, pretty much covering the area of northern Kazakhstan. So it's this western part of the steppe belt where we know now the horse domestication happened in this core area, probably a bit smaller than I mentioned, but pretty much in this part of the world, and from where we have the earliest evidence of the horse use in their various archaeological materials. One thing to mention before I jump into my materials and my topic is to say that when we speak about the horse domestication, nowadays we mainly base our knowledge on the quite intense DNA studies, and these materials are nowadays well known. It's widely published, and people people have opportunity to read all of this data for almost 10 years now. So it's not that new even, um, but again, it is based mainly on the DNA data and less on info this data came from archaeological sources. It's not archaeology per se because it's not the analysis of archaeological materials. It's an analysis of biological materials, right? And another thing to add is that nowadays we know something about this core, when and how probably it happened in the early Bronze Age, in transition to the Middle Bronze Age. But there is a significant gap between these earliest materials of probably domesticated horses to the period where we know that the horse was in use, meaning that where we see the solid evidence for horse use by humans, and horse participation in the human economies and human societies, and this original period of horse domestication. And this gap is about, well, probably I would say about 400 to 500 years, in where we don't have much archaeological materials. So, and for that reason, I'm jumping from right into the period where we have this data, where we have solid archaeological evidence for the horse use. And I'm not going to talk about this preceding period of time where this gap happened, for a simple reason that there is no much to talk about. There is no much materials published to the date or even studied to the date. And there are very, very scarce pieces of information which are almost not available to the international reader. So I'm not going to talk about that period, and I'm going to start from the period of about 2000 BC, which is when we have, as I mentioned before, when we have solid evidence for the horse domestication. And so this would be the chronology in archaeological terms. It's called the Middle Bronze Age, and when we have this evidence for the horse use, and it goes all the way to the final Bronze Age, and of course in the early Iron Age, we have completely developed horse economies and undoubtful evidence for the horse participation in human societies or human cultures. In human economies. And schematically, I can show you it here on this graph here, which is basically based on the started carbon dates, with a peak around 2000 BC, or well, probably it's around 1800s BC here, when we have very significant evidence for the horse use, and some radiocarbon dates covering the archaeological context from where this evidence are coming. So again, just to highlight, when here in this period, we're not talking about this period between 2500 BC to 2000 BC, where probably the initial phase of horse domestication happened, because we don't have much of archaeological materials there. And we're going to cover, I'm going to talk more about the period beginning on 2000 BC to approximately, as I mentioned before, 1600s BC, but going even more into the late and final Bronze Age, on the age with the early Iron Age. So again, in archaeological terms, it's called middle to late Bronze Age. So that would be the framework, the geographical and chronological framework of my data, on which I will base my talk. So let's see. So what do we have in this period? The evidence are quite abundant. There are no doubts that people started to work with horses. There are no doubts that people used them for various purposes, and it's coming from vast area of the steppes. It's not only one site where we would have horses and horse-related artifacts, but it's It's coming from all over the place in the steppes, from the Balkans and to the Urals, or actually vice versa, from the Urals to the Balkans. And all kinds of evidence we can actually split into two groups. First of all, it's horse remains, so the actual remains of horses, which came from usually from ritual contexts, but quite often from the domestic contexts as well, and everything related to horse tag, and specifically horse beads. So obviously, in the Bronze Age, people didn't use much of the metals. The metal was scarce and precious. So for horse bridles, they would use mainly organic materials, meaning bone, antler, and leather. So obviously, even leather didn't survive the time. And from archaeological context, we have artifacts made of bone and antler. So I show both of these traits here on the slide, so you can see that we have quite significant evidence for the horse remains in forms of complete horse skeletons. And these artifacts, which are called cheekpieces in archaeological terminology, which came from, sometimes in some cases, they come actually from the same contexts. And again, there are lots of cases where we have these artifacts coming together with horse remains. They are not just isolated cases, but many of them. Here, I actually wanted to show you that there are no doubts that these artifacts are related to the horses, because on the image on the left, the one which is in black and white, we actually have these artifacts located in situ on the horse cranium, on the horse cranium. The one on the right side is quite famous in the archaeological context. The one which looks yellowish, with two artifacts on the horse skull. It's quite famous in archaeological publications, but unfortunately, that's not real. This was made by the excavator for the presentation purposes for his students right in the field, and then it was published in the book without any comments that it's not real thing, and became famous. So again, unfortunately, that's not a. Can I actually show it? Update. Not sure if I can use my mouse to demonstrate it. I should be able to do that somehow, right? Some pointer, maybe. Oops.
We can see your
Maybe not.
mouse. We can
You can
see
see
the
my
mouse.
mouse. Okay, perfect. This one is actual archaeological context, at least as it was published. It's quite an old excavation, so it's from 1950s. But the author published it that way, saying in the publication explicitly that this was found that way. And there is one more case which I don't have a photograph for, but again we have the same context with the actually two horse crania and cheekpieces located on them. And this one, as I said, there's just a representation by excavator. That's not a real thing. But it doesn't matter that it's not real. What is important that we have many of this context of these artifacts coming together with horse remains. So we have no doubts nowadays that these things are related, and these things are related to horse bridles. So, and that's why I'm saying that we have these two main avenues of evidence: horse remains, which are less studied, and cheekpieces, which are nowadays studied quite well. And and the reason for the cheekpieces being studied well by archaeologists is that uh, they're known in many in dozens, if not hundreds hundreds actually, yes, hundreds of archaeological contexts, all the way from almost Altai to the Balkans, and for that reason, already from the at least the 60s, they've been used by archaeologists as chronological markers. So if such a thing was found in a context, in archaeological context, the archaeologist would be able to to date this context in a relative sense, and that allowed in the 70s, that allowed the Soviet archaeologist Elena Kuzmina to build this chronological scheme of the Eurasian Bronze Age, which was based on these artifacts from the Urals to the Balkans, specifically to the Mycenae, because we have these artifacts in the context of the sharp grave of Mycenae. So the widespread in Eurasia allowed archaeologists to build the chronological frameworks, and these artifacts were quite unique for this purpose, because there's no such other artifact in such different archaeological contexts where we would be able to directly compare them, because they were used for the same purpose, for the control and for the control of the horse. So, and that, as I said, that was the reason why archaeologists were focused on them and studied them for decades all over the place in the former Soviet Union and other countries where such artifacts were found. And they were studied in various ways. Of course, first of all, pure archaeological methods, meaning that they were studied for typology, for their morphology, but later on, more specifically for the using the methods of use-wear analysis with microscopic traces studied under the microscope, visual under the microscope, to understand how it actually was used. And this was an important avenue of research because it actually produced quite robust evidence to show that use-wear was quite uniform. Again, meaning that these widespread artifacts were used for the same purpose. Again, meaning the horse control. So this was a short introduction to these two sources of evidence. Let's speak a little bit about what we know about horse remains, and all of this information is quite brand new, unpublished, and we actually started to do this research just before the outbreak of the war, and of course, for the obvious reason, it was not finished and it's not published for the same reason. But still, and this is quite preliminary, so this data is preliminary, but I still would like to share. So what we did is that we studied the horse remains from several cemeteries, mainly located in the southern Urals and Kazakhstan. The total number of individuals studied was, I believe, 32. No, yeah, it's here 32. They came from 4 cemeteries in which we have quite a huge number of horse remains. And they all date to the earliest period, meaning to the period around 2000 BC to 1800 BC. And what is important, of course, is that yes, we do have evidence for the horse use in the form of pathologies. Unfortunately, it was not always possible to study the complete horse skeletons in this research because they were not always available for various reasons. Because it's not always that archaeologists keep everything what they found in the field, and quite often it's only crania which are available for these studies. So for that reason, I'm showing the statistics only for crania. As you can see from this graph on the left, there are evidence for the horse use, and they're quite significant. It's not like only isolated cases where we would see work-related pathologies, but it's actually quite widespread in horse remains. And the correlation is quite simple, that the more the older the horse, the more evidence, the more pathologies we have on the skeletons. We don't have, like, there are almost no pathologies on the skeletons of young horses, and there are young horses, like of 2 years of age in this sample, and there are quite old horses up to 18 or maybe even 20 years of age in this sample with all kinds of pathologies on their skeletons, or at least on their crania. Uh, but even the age is quite significant here, right? Especially the older horses coming from archaeological contexts are telling us the story. Because obviously that if we would, in the Bronze Age we would have only wild, like um, absolutely wild horses which would be hunted by people, probably wouldn't have all the such old horses. It wouldn't be that common. But yeah, we have quite old horses of and both sexes. What is important? So stallions and mares are more present in this sample, meaning that people actually care about them and they live long life before entering this archaeological context. Um, and again, in all cases, the sample is coming from the cemeteries, meaning these are ritual contexts which were prepared purposefully by the people and which were like, carefully uh, um, organized, right? Meaning that every element of this context were ritually important. So it was not possible for the people to do that in some occasional way, meaning that even all older horses there is in this context are not for just for some um, for are not without a reason. There should be the significant reason why the older horses would enter this important ritual context. And for my understanding, these reasons, of course, would be that the horses were used for work. And the most famous cases, of course, are coming of such horses are coming from the cemeteries with evidence for the chariots or two-wheeled two-wheeled carts. Well, we call them chariots. There are not many of them, but in these cases where we have significant evidence, we have chariots, cheekpieces, which I mentioned before, and horse remains. And one of these examples you can see on the right of this slide, with the grave from the quite famous grave from the Eurasia cemetery, uh, where all of these pieces of evidence came together. Uh, two pairs of cheekpieces, two horses, the chariot, and of course, a person, a deceased person. Uh, there are not many cases of the chariots like that, unfortunately. But in that cases where we have them, yeah, this quite a telling story. And again, what is important is that in such cases where we studied horse remains, we have evidence for horse utilization, and I'm gonna tell you what are they. So there are pretty much uh, we can split them into three groups, I guess. Well, the biggest group, of course, is the craniopathologists, and again, I should stress it again. Uh, for the majority of Bronze Age cemeteries, only crania were studied because this was the only materials available, not because for the like logistical reasons and for the reasons of how they were preserved in archaeological collections. Even though we know that originally in the context, in the archaeological context, there were complete, in many cases, complete skeletons, or at least crania and the limbs. Unfortunately, it's not always that the whole things were presented in the collections. But anyway, in that cases where we in which we studied, we see pretty much three groups of evidence. So, of course, the most famous because of David Henton's studies from the middle 90s is the pathologist of the horse premolars, second premolars, and these things are actually quite widespread. You can see one of the two examples here where those things are well visible, but these are not the only examples. And David Henton connected it to the use of leather beads, uh, which is not exactly confirmed experimentally, right? Because it's difficult to confirm. But I should say that yes, we do see this evidence on Bronze Age horses, and they're quite uniform in the cases where we have them, and they obviously connect, like they correlate with the horse age, which is on the one hand could signify that yeah, well, that may be related to the diet, but it's not always that all horses of the older age would have them, and that may suggest that yes, that is related to the use of the beads. Um, the other pathologies would be related to the nasal bones. So the recesses like that here under A, uh, Will Taylor explains them as related to the use of the nose band and developed grooves on this part of nasal bones, which has been shown to be a result of the hard breathing and hard work. Hard breathing associated with hard work. That would be the best way to pronounce it. So all of these little pieces of evidence are present in Bronze Age horses, and I purposefully choose here to show examples from different horses from different individuals to show that these are not coming just from one animal, but they are coming from different individuals. So this is a main group of evidence coming from crania. But in those cases where we did have access to limb bones, at least limb bones, we would also see developed pathologies on there, like here in this case, like overdeveloped bone tissue, which is usually associated with muscle work and sometimes probably uh, hard, well, muscle pathology is related to the hard work. Uh, these evidence are not that common for the Bronze Age horses, or at least not common in these samples which I have, but that obviously requires more study and requires a larger sample to see if this is widespread or not. But I would still mention that this is something worth looking for, and people actually did it for the period which I mentioned before as a gap, where we don't have much information. Well, in some cases, in this early Bronze Age horse bones, yes, people did find such developed pathologies. Unfortunately, these are isolated cases, so it's not like big samples of horse remains or horse limbs with such developed pathologies, which would signify horse use for the work. But there are cases, and I would just say that of course, it's worth continue studying such cases, and we need to have more examples of that to be able to see how the domestication process unfolded in this early period and what people used horses for. Uh, but again, as I mentioned before, this is a gap in our knowledge, and the earliest quite significant materials are coming from this period around 2000 BC and go to the middle of the second millennium BC. So this is quite significant and pretty much telling us the story that people were using horses. And we see this on horse skeletons. Um, but here I want to a little flashback or like a side avenue, which I would like to mention. Uh, so coming through studying these horse remains, coming through them, uh, I figured that probably um, in the modern culture we really misconstruct quite often misconstruct the use of the horses in the antiquity in the past, especially in these early periods. And in popular art culture, in the art like that, like the example here I present here, we see this strong characters and very idealized use of the horses by the or even like maybe not even use, but sort of friendly relationships between horses and humans. While looking to the horse remains, I would say tell that the story is actually different, and we probably tell more about well, if not abuse of the animals, but at least about hard work, because bone pathologies, they don't develop uh, easily, and of course uh, they develop only if there is a quite significant impact throughout the life of the any organism, any species, right? It's not only related to the horse, but it's true for the humans as well. But if we see such pronounced pathologies like one here on the nasal bones of this horse, well, we can probably say that this animal didn't live a simple and easy life, enjoying the steppes and just being fed or just foraging around the steppes and drinking the water all year round. Probably did the hard work, and um, we don't know what were the conditions in which people kept this horse or other horses. And of course, sometimes they get the brutal life, like the brutal death, excuse me, like with the example here of the horse being killed with a heavy blunt just into the forehead. Um, so, and just again, it's just a side avenue to say that quite often people see the past in the idealized form, and it's not the story which archaeology tells us. Well, this was the first avenue of research which I just wanted to share with you because again, like, this all quite brand new and unpublished yet. And now I'm switching to the topic which is again well studied and well published. So there's less new information for you, but I still want to summarize what we know about this second type of evidence and what story they tell us and why it is important actually to continue studying them. So, as I mentioned, these are parts of the wrist bridles. In archaeological terminology, it is called cheekpieces, meaning that there were parts of the horse bridles of the horse beats actually located outside of the beats on the horse cheeks and connecting the organic beats made of leather to other parts of the bridles, also made of leather. Um, None of these parts survived in the archaeological context, but bone and antler-made cheekpieces did. And as I mentioned before, there are hundreds of them nowadays known in various contexts, and that allows the profound study. So, according to morphological studies and based on statistics, we have three major types or three major forms of these artifacts. Uh, the first one is called shield-like because it looks like a little shield or little disc. It's not always disc, so discoid is not a correct term, but so it's like a little shield. The second type is plate form because it's usually rectangular, quite often, and crescent-like. And the third type is rod-shaped. So it's usually just a straight rod, but not always. Sometimes it is curved, like the one here on the slide. Um, and the statistics is quite telling the story. So, like on the slide here, you can see the multidimensional scaling of the sample, meaning that it's not it is what it emerged. The space you can see where artifacts located, it's emerged from their morphology by the statistical analysis, by the means of the statistical analysis, meaning that some artifacts group together and other artifacts don't group with them, and you can see that quite easily from this image. And obviously the shield-like artifacts group together on the left side, and like plate and oar-shaped artifacts grouped together on the right side of this graph. It is quite interesting because this grouping actually coincides with our understanding of chronology. I mean, everything on the left is earlier than everything on the right. Of course, not in the position how not in the exact positions how it's located on this graph. It's just a very because again these positions are not determined by the chronology. It's determined by the morphology of the artifacts. But it is just interesting that we can see that the statistics of based on morphology coincided with our understanding of chronology. So that means that probably these things actually meaningful. That the meaning is that there was a change in morphology in time. So these artifacts did change from one type to another type. And of course, the question is why? Why there was such a significant change in the artifact type and in the artifact morphologies? And one of the simplest and obvious answers to this question, which is obvious just from looking to the materials, is that while people change their mind about using materials, raw materials, initially shield-like artifacts are quite often made of antler, moose or elk antler, usually moose antler actually. And of course, moose antler is not something you can come by easily. So it's you either need to hunt the moose or to find it in the somewhere in the forest. It's not like you can do like easy procurement of this material. So and it's not always that you can predict that you have the needed amount of material. So this is much more rare, much more specialized, and again, and it's not, and it's as I showed before, it is quite often related to this context with chariots. So again, everything on the left here is antler and related to the chariot context. Plate formed, on the other hand, were made of the tubular bones, long bones of the animal limbs. And for the herding societies, this is the most common material possible. So it's very easy to come by these bones, the limb bones, and use them as material. So it's much more predictable source of material, meaning, and also much more common, meaning that you can produce much more things, use it for much more, produce much more artifacts if needed, using this material. So that is a significant change. And then later, with the roll-shaped artifacts, we can see the switch to the use of antler, like in this case, but not always. Quite often, it's also made of just animal bone, and that's like mixed use of both type of materials. Excuse me. So we can see this interesting evolution in how people actually use the raw materials, and again and although at the first glance it just tells us the story. Okay, people switch from rare materials to more common materials, and just because it made much more sense to use bone instead of antler. But still, the question is why? Why did people do so? Like why first of all they needed much more common material, and why they needed probably more of these artifacts to be produced. So why the switch to such a simplified forms and simplified more common material? So the question actually remains open. So again, just to summarize, we see first of all, there is a quite pronounced typology with three types of artifacts. This typology is quite often based on, to large degrees, based on the material which people choose to produce these artifacts. Um, and it coincides with chronology. So these are important findings just coming from the analysis of the morphology of these artifacts. But the question remains, why? Like what happened through time from 2000 BC to much later in the millennia that people switched from one type to another. And to answer this question, we conducted I myself and with my colleagues, we conducted a series of experimental research of these artifacts, meaning that we used them in the work with horses. And there were two types of work. The first type is the experimentation with the chariot. I mean, using it to control two horses in the cart, so pulling the cart. And here in the photograph, you can see actually you can see the chariot, but you don't see the cheekpieces. So you can see that there are more metal bits, but just didn't happen to have a photograph where we used cheekpieces. But so you have to believe me, take it by my word that yes, we did use cheekpieces in this work as well. And the second is the use of cheekpieces to control the mounted horse. So for riding, horseback riding. So both types of work were performed, and these were controlled experiments, uh, spanning through decades actually, and used on the comparison with the use where of actual ancient artifacts. And again, just as example, you can see a pair of cheekpieces from archaeological context where we have quite pronounced evidence for use in traces. And these traces are usually located around this hole, which is always present in every artifact, and sometimes on these spikes here. But the most uniform and absolute, the most uniform, the most reliable use where is always located around this hole, this central hole, because it's the only, I would say this the only component of any morphology which is always there, and the rest differ quite a lot. Like the spikes can be different in shapes and in number. Other holes may be different in shapes and number and in their locations. Even here, you can see that they're located differently. Uh, but this central hole is always there. So that's what we looked at in many cases. And in those cases where we have evidence for use, where meaning that there are traces, um, there are traces of contacting of the surfaces of these artifacts with something like leather. So meaning that the original form of the holes were changed through the work and changed uniformly. So that's what we looked at by doing the use wear analysis. So this was what we wanted to compare, and pretty much this was the result of our experimental work. Like here, you can see it quite easily because it's painted with it's colored, so you can see that the change in the color is due to this contact between leather beads and the surface of the artifact, and this is made of antler. So that's how the bridle looked. So the mouthpiece go through these central holes in each artifact, and the reins would be attached to that part, just through the rings made of antler, as it's in here. So what we attempted to study is how this use word traces associate with different types of horse use, and if there is any pattern of change between how the horse worked and what kind of use we have in these experimental replicas. And I'm just reminding you here with these photographs that actually horse pathology, the pathologies also appear in horse tissues, in this case in second premolars, um, and not only on artifacts. And I believe that at least this premolar here is coming from the same context with cheekpieces, this kind of artifacts. So we do have coincidence of evidence, bone pathology, and use were on ancient artifacts coming from the same archaeological contexts. So one time here, okay. So again, what we're able to find out that actually there is a difference between between the use of these artifacts for chariot driving or any sort of driving. Actually, it doesn't matter if it's a chariot, if it's a chariot or a cart or whatever. So the chariot here is just an example. So it doesn't matter. Or the use of the artifacts for the horseback riding. And these two artifacts here is actually showing exactly that pattern. So on the left, we have artifacts used for driving, and the use were is usually located on like lower segments of this central hole, but either on the left or on the right side. And for the horseback riding, it's usually like straight on the lower part of this hole. And this was quite uniform. There are I'm showing just these two artifacts, but actually there are many. There was a series produced to demonstrate this exact pattern. So that allowed us to well, maybe not to conclude, but to hypothesize that these different types of cheekpieces actually related to the different types of work, meaning that people began using shield-like cheekpieces for driving, uh, presumably chariots, and that's why we have the use of this rare material. That's why it's difficult to produce, and it's usually coming from the specific regional context with chariots. While later in time, people switched for much people switched to use much more common material, meaning the tubular bones of domestic animals, to produce artifacts for the horseback riding, because horseback riding become just a widespread thing for everyone and not just for the elite charioteers, um, which were of course not everyone in the society. So and that this was probably the reason why we can see the switch and the disappearance of one type of artifacts and the appearance of other types of artifacts. This elite chariots probably disappeared from the societies, from the steppe societies, and horseback riding become much more common thing across the steppes. That's why we see this switch and this type of artifacts. And that agrees with our experimental work because we do see these use wear patterns, which would which which would be typical for one or another. So either for the driving of the cart or any kind of vehicle or horseback riding. So that's the story which is told by experimental archaeology, right? But how it all happened and how quickly it happened and why? That is the most important question. So why people stopped using the chairs and switched to horseback riding is maybe, well, it's not an obvious. There's not an obvious answer. Excuse me, for me at least. Uh, we can state it as a fact that yeah, we see the disappearance of the chairs from any archaeological contexts, and switch to the horseback riding. But yeah, we definitely don't know why. And what is important, we don't know how quickly that happened. And that's where chronology becomes an important part of the story. So here I'm showing you what we actually know about the chronology of cheekpieces in the absolute terms. You can see this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cases, 10 cases where we have dated radiocarbon dating archaeological contexts with cheekpieces. And 10 cases is actually quite a little number, especially that in some cases they come from the same context. So it actually would be 9, uh, because there is at least the one cemetery which is the same. Um, and these radiocarbon dates were produced by different methods, and not always by the best with the best possible precision. Like for instance, the case from Saturn Cemetery, Borough One, like here, and you can see that there is a huge error range associated with this date, and that's because there was no due to the dating method available at the time. So it's not the most precise method available. That's the first thing. But also this again, these are not these are the context state, meaning that archaeologists sampled some materials from the same context. Well, usually it would be animal bone, but not always. Sometimes it's human bone, and submitted them for radiocarbon dating, which which does not actually provide the specific date for the artifacts that provide the date for the context. But obviously, artifacts were produced before especially if we were talking about the uh, ritual context. They were produced before them. We don't know when exactly. Like, was it like 2 years before that was produced specifically for the, let's say, for the burial, or was it used for generations and then ended up in this context? Um, after decades of use. We don't know any of that. So that means that we actually cannot meaningfully compare artifacts to each other, and we don't know, we cannot actually say how quickly this process has unfolded in the Bronze Age. And was it like abrupt change, or was it some slow process of um, replacing one method of horse use with another? We don't know that. Um, And this time scale on this multidimensional scaling, which I'm showing again, that's a very general. That's just a very general idea of how it happened. But actually, our current knowledge of chronology doesn't allow us to be much more specific and trying to answer the question how quickly and why these changes happen. And that's where my proposed project is coming. So I actually proposed to radiocarbon date the sample of chickpieces which I collected um, from various museums in Russia and Kazakhstan uh, in order to produce a much more specific chronology. Like in this graph, you can see actually the model. This is not a actual data. This was just produced as an example of could how it how could it work, how could it unfold to demonstrate the method, and what we could expect to see. I mean, how quickly, for instance, the change happened, and where exactly in Eurasia things happened. Because I have samples collected from all over this area, basically from the Don River on the west to the eastern Kazakhstan steppes on the east. And I would use such a methodology to produce such maps to demonstrate how this process unfolded and how quickly it happened. And then, of course, from that, we would seek for the explanations why these changes happened in the human societies. So again, I collected a sample of well, I collected samples for radiocarbon dating from this type of artifacts, covering all type of artifacts for radiocarbon dating. That happened before the war. That happened before the outbreak of the war, and of course, it all came from the museums in the Russian Federation uh, with international recognized borders. So none of them came from any occupied territories of Ukraine, and I'm stressing it purposefully because I was accused by the NSF reviewer of doing that, which was absolutely unfair and not based on any sort of information or evidence, and which really pissed me off because it's just unprofessional from their side. But so again, I'm stressing that purposefully that all of these materials came from the international recognized borders of the Russian Federation and the Republic of Kazakhstan, and of course in full collaboration with the museums which provided these artifacts for sampling and collaborating with me in order to do it professionally and without damage to the artifacts. So of course, there were micro samples weighing less than a couple of grams in each case, which is enough for the modern radiocarbon dating, or supposed to be enough for modern radiocarbon dating. And I collected over the complete sample is about 30 artifacts probably, but nowadays I'm seeking. And in order to do that, I started a crowdfunding project with the experiment.com in order to date 15 of these artifacts. And the number of 15 is based, of course, on the it's a sample of the sample, because in some cases I had the artifacts coming from the same context, so I decided not to date both of them. For instance, I just only one of them, and sometimes it was repeated in terms of typology. So what I would prefer to date all types instead of producing many dates for one of the type. So to spread the dates more evenly across the sample. And of course, it is limited by the budget, because radiocarbon dating is not the cheap thing to do. And so I decided to choose this number of artifacts to study. Again, for that reason, I started a crowdfunded project, which is not doing well. To go through it, and probably I'm gonna be a bit more proactive in trying to find sources to fund it. But again, because I was in the middle of transition from the new world to the old world in the past couple of weeks, I couldn't do that more proactively. But anyway, if you anyone who would be able to split it or to do that, someone generous enough and free enough to spare some money to do such a research, I would be really grateful, and that would help our understanding of the past, but also our understanding of the modern world and modern equestrian practices, because pretty much everything what we do with horses nowadays is rooted in this early period. And cheekpieces is a very good example of that, for the simple reason that it's the same principle we still use with modern beads, with metal beads. It's absolutely the same principle which was developed in the Bronze Age and survived till today, basically. Well, I think I spoke already too long, so thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for participating, and if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. And this was a fascinating talk. So if people want to ask questions, they can either put them in the chat, or if they feel they will want to ask directly, you can use the raised hand function, and you will be invited to unmute. while we are waiting, I also have some kind of one comment and one question. So the comment is about you mentioned idealization of the past, and we actually started this year with two seminars looking at kind of not prehistoric but historical use of horses and ethics in this. And it's actually, we all tend to idealize the past as we demonize it and say how barbaric everybody was. I'm sure people who have Russian background remember Nevzorov's TV shows where he
Right,
was telling how awful it was, and how he's the only one who knows how to work with horses. And then
right,
yeah, or you idealize the past and say like in the Middle Ages or the Greeks or Xenophon, they knew how to work with horses. They were wonderful people. And during the seminars, we showed with historical examples. Actually, even Xenophon wasn't so wonderful to horses, and yeah, they all used pain methods, and we still have them today. Actually, one comment I had was you showed these cheekpieces with these little studs on them, and one group, in one social media group, which is of professionally fighting against abuse of horses, they shared cheek pieces for harness driving up, which you can apparently buy. They're also round. They're made either of kind of hard rubber or plastic, so very similar in shape, but they have brushes on the inside,
hmm
not these big stumps, which could be gentle, but like something like brushes, like toothbrushes. And these are for trotting races, for harness driving, uh, which is considered to be cruel, and I'm sure it's not pleasant for the horse to have it on the cheeks. So we
No,
shouldn't
it's not.
demonize the past, and we shouldn't say that we do everything better now. Um, that's a very interesting ethical question. Um, how we can rate this from the experience of the horse. Probably not very pleasant, right? Um,
Well, one of the most important finding was that from this experimental work was actually, well, why people had to develop such a technique, such a material, such artifacts. Well, because the just leather bead or even like a rope around the bars was not enough for them, so they had to develop this more cruel method. Um, well, maybe not necessarily cruel, but a harder method of the horse control. And it actually kept developing through time with harder and harder methods, meaning when people switched to the metal artifacts. And we know absolutely the same typologically the same artifacts um, from the Middle East, where we have absolutely the same type of cheekpieces but made of bronze. And of course, it's much harder and maybe actually more cruel than antler ones. So people actually, yeah, they did it purposefully, making it harder and harder, just in order to have better control. And probably they didn't really care about, well-being of the horses.
well, if it's the question is being about being killed, it's all about control, right? If you have an
Exactly.
uncontrolled
So, but
horse,
on the other hand,
yeah.
we should look at the contexts, and that's I think that's the most important lesson, that nowadays we don't have such a cruel context for ourselves in the society, right? We don't have to use horses to train them to behave well on the battlefield, and our lives don't depend on them anymore, and to such degree, like an ancient charioteer would depend on the horses, and their lives would depend on the horses and how well they controlled them on the battlefield. So that I think that's the one of the most important finding and the lesson from such a comparison. That, well, if the conditions changed, well, probably we should reconsider our practices as well. There's absolutely probably sometimes there's no need for the practices which were well suited for the battlefields of the antiquity. So why would we keep using them?
Well, that's another question because I think horses and are returning to the battlefields. In many countries, they're kind of still using cavalry and introducing them. And I think in Ukraine, all kinds of equids are used on the battlefield. So we had this news as well. Um, but yeah, absolutely don't need to use horses on the battlefield or for work. We have mechanized transport for that. Um, but there is a question from Loneke Del Po about evidence of castration for horses before Common Era. Um,
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. Um, I think as far as I understand, it is not an easy avenue to study, just based on horse remains, on bone remains. That's the one thing to say. On the other hand, we don't have enough data. People just didn't ask such a question to answer that. For in one case, which we studied quite detailed, of the Novolinovsky horses from Kazakhstan, there there's there are two horses coming from the same context, a mare and a stallion, um, and it's published. And yes, we hypothesize that probably there may be evidence for castration, but really statistically, it's quite impossible to say. So it may be, it is maybe, but we can suggest that if we have a really old stallion which probably worked in a pair with a mare, probably it could be castrated, and probably we could see some differences in the bones of how bones developed. But without good statistics, I wouldn't be confident about saying anything, especially, well, at least for the Bronze Age.
as far as I know, if you don't have complete skeletons, it's not even always possible to say if it's a mare or a stallion with full certainty.
Exactly. That's another thing, and of course, it's not always the case at all.
Um, okay, and I had another question that's also based related to horse sex. So you mentioned that younger horses had less kind of pathologies, fewer pathologies, and can you is there any difference based on the horse's sex, or you cannot tell? Like I was thinking maybe mares will
No,
use
well, yeah,
less.
exactly. We cannot tell that. Well, first of all, for the younger ages, of course, you cannot determine sex on the base of horse teeth, right? Uh, they're not abrupt yet. So, and quite often it just like crania, not complete crania present. So no, there's no way to determine that. And probably, well, with the DNA, that would be possible, of course, but again, we would need a large sample submitted for the DNA research and do that. But no, just unthinkable nowadays. That's not possible to determine at all.
I think we discussed it with Kate Ken, but there are cases when when mares would have canine teeth. So it's if you just use teeth, it's not always possible to tell if it's a stallion or a mare. Okay, canine teeth are more often associated with uncastrated stallions, but mares could have them too. Haven't seen any, but
Right,
it's
right.
possible.
Can you, yeah. So because the evidence is so scarce, I wouldn't be confident to say that there's a good statistics
Yeah.
to perform such an analysis. Not at all. So that's why individual cases sometimes are very important. Like the mentioned Novolinovsky case, it is very important because we have two complete skeletons, well studied, um, and where we have a stallion and a mare, and we did study them completely as completely as we could, but the DNA, of course. But these are isolated cases. There are not many of them at all.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting. For later period, for Roman Britain, there was a study of two horse skeletons. I think one was complete in the Museum of London, and the other, I don't think it was complete. But basically, the author argued that one of them would have been a chariot horse, and based on pathology. So you would develop specific pathologies if it's a driving horse, as opposed to a riding horse. That's also something very
Yeah,
interesting.
that this analysis are being performed. Um, well, for the later periods, and again for the isolated cases like in China, for instance, it is possible to do on these larger materials from the Eurasian steppes. But again, it's not always that we have complete skeletons, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And for this case I mentioned with the Novolinovsky, well, we don't have developed pathologists of like shoulder bones, for instance, or the vertebra. Uh, we don't see pathologies on these bones, even though they're older horses, like up to the stallion, I believe, is 18 years of age. Uh, but the only pathologies we see are located on the crania and not on other postcranial skeletons.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, you mentioned that like pathologies they should be associated with continuous use of the horse. I would say that like some strenuous exercise or incorrect equipment, they would result in pathologies quite soon, actually. So it's not, you don't need years of work. If you have incorrectly fitting bit, it could result in war on the
Right.
teeth just after a few riding lessons. That's what the vet told me. Um, but on the other hand, people would probably um, try to fit horses correctly. It's not always possible to say how long a horse was working, I guess.
Yeah. There is a difference between like individual history of the each animal and what I would prefer to go with nowadays is the much like larger samples to see if there are patterns.
Mm.
Um, I think that what this is what we're missing nowadays, that we don't see patterns because we don't study them enough. We don't study like bone pathologies for to answer such specific questions, like if they're present and what kind of pathologies are present. So that's the word with some examples of that, but again, it's just coming from only 4 cemeteries located in a small area in the southern Urals, and not covering the complete area of the horse use and Bronze Age. So I would like to see develop another project where we studied such patterns and not just individual histories of some individual animals.
Yeah, okay, so I don't want to kind of monopolize the conversation. If other people have comments, questions, you are welcome. You can also unmute and ask them. Um, so, and I saw on your page for crowdfunding that you also made this replica bridle.
Right.
Um,
I did. I just yeah, I have.
so it's also very
This was this is made for the under the request of the museum,
interesting.
the Colorado University at Boulder. They I don't know if I can share this information actually, but they're working on the exhibit, so they asked me to produce a replica of the bridle, the like pretty much what were the same as what I used for my experimental work here. So yeah, pretty much like that one, which I just have produced for them and gonna send it to them via FedEx like tomorrow probably. So if you happen to be in Boulder, Colorado, so you will be able to see that in the exhibit.
Some horse historians who live in the US, so I'm sure they will appreciate that as well. Um, well, I wanted to ask, so you worked with horses using this replica bridle, experimented with horses. What was the horses' kind of reaction to this new equipment? You make any remarks?
Well, all the horses we worked with were, familiar with the use of bridles, so there was not much new for them. And the trickiest thing, of course, was the use of a pair of horses for the chariot because they never walk together. Uh, it's like these two guys here. But at the end of the day, it all worked out quite well. They well behaving. Well, we had lots of adventures as well. But at the end of the day, they domestic horses. They know what they're doing, right? It's not much new for them in this regard. Um, so yeah, they just did what we asked them to do. I wouldn't say that such a bridle is the safest one, safest possible. Actually, organic bits can be chewed by the horse and can break just occasionally. You never know when it happens. Sometimes it serves for hours and hours and dozens of hours, and sometimes a horse can chew them pretty much in the first minutes. Um, and of course, then you lose the control if that happens. And tricky things start. But that's I guess that would be the feature of any organic material used for that. And of course, it's not the safest thing to do. But again, because we worked with domestic horses, which were well behaved and quite often in the controlled environments, like you can see here in these photos. So it was always in some sort of enclosures. Uh, well, it, well, we had some accidents, but nothing crazy, and nothing would which would resulted in trauma to horses or humans.
Oh, very interesting. Do you ever
So
consider that,
nothing more.
yeah. Did you ever
Sorry.
consider that there could have been beatless bridles? Because with cheekpieces it could work. Just suggest.
Well, no, they definitely were. They definitely were. I'm quite sure that as I said, the chickpeas were a result of develop they developed for such from such bridles where because they needed to make them um, harder.
Mm,
And of course, people knew all kinds of tricks, how to work with horses. It
yeah,
just it just the artifact of archaeology that in archaeology we only have chickpieces. We don't have beatless bridles surviving in archaeological contexts.
no. I'm just thinking that if there is war on the nose, that would come from noseband. And for a bridle, for a bit,
Hmm.
you don't necessarily need a noseband, but if it's a bitless bridle, then it would involve war on the nose. Because
Right,
that's
right.
where the
Well,
pressure.
it could be any sort of combination of that. And
Yeah, it
again,
could be a
that's
combination.
what sometimes that's why the individual story histories of animals can be important. This recess of the nose could be the use of sort of beatless bridles, like easily, yeah. Um, and again, I'm quite sure that people knew all kinds of methods, and they were not like strictly limited to use of these kind of bridles with cheekpieces. Yeah, they could do all kinds of things.
Just as today, people also know all kinds of interesting tricks. So there is a comment from Melissa about yeah, so about this kind of uh, how horses would feel. So pointy parts that face into the horse's cheeks and their effect. Are there nerves in this area? So that's probably a question for somebody with veterinary knowledge. So, yeah, so. And the noseband can have a large effect on pain or controllability when positioned on the lower nasal bone. You can actually break the lower nasal bone if you put it that low. And if it's really,
Yeah, yeah.
really mm, applying pressure. Um,
Like this one here, for instance.
yeah, the red
Um,
bridle.
but the thing is that all of this reconstruction, they're coming from the morphology of these artifacts. Like there are holes and there are uh, things to attach, to attach like little parts of the bridle which are visible and with use wear. So we definitely can say that, well, something was attached here and that would look like a noseband. And then in this case, then the noseband would go that low, and yeah, that may be first of all dangerous for the horse, but also that probably was done purposefully in order to make an even harder impact. So you use the mouth, you use the bars, and the nose bones, which are quite gentle in any horse here. So it's the combination of the impact through the impact on all parts of the horse mouth and nose, and in order to make it even harder.
Yeah,
But again, it is important to stress that this is coming from this morphology of these artifacts. That probably yes, there was such a low nose band attached, so that would impact such these bones specifically.
what we also often forget is that today we ride with tight reins with contact most often, and people like, in the Middle Ages until very recently they wouldn't have this tight contact. Also, when driving, you would rarely have this tight contact. Of course, I don't know about prehistorical riding, if we can say anything about the way horses were ridden or driven. But quite often, historically, you wouldn't have constant pressure on the noseband, and it's kind of it would work like emergency brakes. So, for example, for the
Right,
medieval period, there are lots of bits which look really cruel, but they would be cruel only if you apply pressure, and most of the time you wouldn't apply pressure. Um,
right,
and the same with Western riding today. So in Western riding, you often have bits which are very severe, and Western riders mostly ride with reins which are hanging loose, so there is very little impact. Um, so for prehistorical riding or driving, unless we have images, probably we don't know how it happened. Um, unless you have broken noses on this horse.
no, yeah, well, I didn't see any,
No, because they
but
can.
again, in archaeological context, it would be difficult to say if it's a broken nose because of the of living history of this history of life of this animal, or it just the result of post-mortal deposition. That would be
Mhm.
quite difficult to distinguish, especially for such bones.
Any evidence of injuries which were healed on horses? Uh,
Not for the Bronze Age.
no.
For the later period, which I didn't include into these presentations, yes. For the early Iron Age, for the Scythian courses, which we also studied, yes, quite a lot, especially on the vertebra, quite a lot of that. Yeah, we for the later period, these pathologies are much more pronounced, and we see quite severe trauma and the results of healing of this trauma. Yeah, but not for the Bronze Age.
Okay. So basically, if a horse was injured, that was it, right? They didn't
Yeah.
engage in.
Well, and that would be expected because again, probably the conditions really changed. Like the condition of work changed, especially from the Middle Bronze Age to the early Iron Age, because that when um, I would expect that in this early period horses were not used a lot for the hard work. People used bovines mainly for the hard work in the early period, and they did not rely on horses which were not that developed yet. not that big yet. Like the mean height of the horse for the Middle Bronze Age is 138, 140 is maximum.
Yeah.
So they're quite little horses.
They're
Ponies
not so
basically,
little.
right, in the modern
Not so
typology.
little, actually. In the Middle Ages, they also had horse of the same size. We have a horse who is 135, and she is ridden also by adult people. So not in armor, uh, but by
Yeah,
quite
maybe,
young
but again,
adults.
we don't have evidence for that.
Yeah. And for driving, you could have
Unfortunately, we don't.
anything.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have evidence for that. I probably should thank you, everyone, and
Yeah.
I should go because I have to go and put my daughter in bed.
Okay, so
It's getting late
let's
here.
thank Igor, and I think we
So
had a very fruitful
thank you,
discussion.
everyone, for yes. I appreciate this discussion, Anastasia, and again, I appreciate the invitation. I hope that everyone learned something new from this talk. And again, please spread the word about the crowdfunding project. If there is anyone, with the freedom to share some resources, that would be great. So thank you again, and yeah, I have to go.